There's a man in a grease-stained gray jumpsuit changing oil at my shop right now, and if you look closely at the stitching on his back, it says Dipstick of Deceit. Every oil change sticker we print carries a 10-digit docket number, the exact same number that appears on the civil judgment I won against him. He used to be my son-in-law. He stole my house, forged my name, and tried to make me the scapegoat for his financial crimes. I'm the one who made sure he'll spend the next 30 years paying for it 1 quart of synthetic blend at a time. My name is Margaret. I'm 54 years old, and before any of this happened, I was a retired bookkeeper. I spent 3 decades reconciling accounts for a regional chain of hardware stores, a job that taught me how to read a general ledger the way some people read a recipe. I raised my daughter Sarah alone after my husband Frank died of a heart attack when she was 16. Frank had been a locksmith, a quiet man with thick fingers that could feel a pin drop inside a cylinder from across the room. He owned a tiny shop with pegboard walls and a black safe he'd restored himself, and on quiet Sundays after church he'd sit me at the kitchen table, blindfold me, and hand me a different Schlage cylinder. He'd say, "Feel for the binder, Marge. That's the one that resists. Light torque. Let the plug speak." I never imagined those lessons would matter decades later, but Frank had a way of planting seeds that bloomed exactly when I needed them. Sarah was my whole world. She was sharp and soft-hearted, a girl who kept a journal of all the birds that visited the peach tree out back. And when she met Darren in an automotive technology class at the community college, I told myself she'd found a partner who shared her good nature. Darren had an easy smile and a habit of leaning into a conversation like he was already trying to solve a problem for you. He could talk about timing belts and overhead camshafts with genuine enthusiasm. They married in our backyard under the magnolia tree, the one Frank had planted the year we bought the house. I cried through the whole ceremony. A year later, Darren came to me with a business plan. He wanted to open a full-service auto repair shop, a clean, modern place with European lifts, a Hunter alignment machine, and a dedicated diagnostic bay. He had a lease lined up on an old tire outlet on the south side of town, a concrete box with high ceilings and a grease pit that needed extensive work, and he'd found a mechanic partner named Mike who could handle the day-to-day wrenching. All he needed was startup capital. The bank wouldn't touch him because his personal credit was thin and the business had no track record, but the credit union said they'd approve a home equity line of credit if I co-signed. I own my house outright, thanks to Frank's life insurance payout and 30 years of living below my means. It was a modest little ranch with a peach tree in the back, a porch swing I'd painted sky blue, and a kitchen where I'd raised a daughter and nursed a husband through his final year. I drove a 10-year-old Corolla and clipped coupons, but that house was my fortress. I signed the papers at the kitchen table, while Sarah hugged my neck so tight I thought I'd burst. $200,000. I believed in family. I believed in my daughter. 2 years later, the foreclosure notice arrived by certified mail. I was sitting on that same porch swing when the postman handed me the envelope, and I remember the way the cicadas stopped buzzing for a second, like even the insects knew something had cracked open. Darren had stopped making payments on the equity loan 6 months earlier, and a second note, a balloon payment of $43,000 that he'd secretly taken out against the same collateral, was now in default. The signature on that note looked exactly like mine, a looping cursive I'd recognize anywhere, except I'd never seen the document in my life. The credit union accelerated the entire balance. The sheriff's sale was set for 30 days. I called Sarah. No answer. I drove to the shop and found the bay doors chained shut, a bright orange Leon notice stapled to the glass with staples driven so deep I could barely peel it off. I called Darren's cell, and a recording told me the number was no longer in service. They vanished. I lost my home. I stood on the sidewalk and watched strangers carry out my mother's cedar chest, the one with the brass corners that smelled like lavender sachets, and Frank's roll-top desk, where he'd kept his lock-picking journals and a framed photo of us dancing at our wedding. A deputy handed me a 3-day eviction notice and a printed list of shelters. I moved into a studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat, a place where the walls vibrated with every spin cycle, and the hot water ran out by 8 at night. I spent my remaining savings on a bankruptcy attorney who spread the documents across his desk and shook his head. "You're legally responsible for every dime," he said. "The co-signature is bulletproof, and this second note, the signature looks real. I'm sorry." I stared at the photocopy of my own name, written by someone else's hand, and felt a terrible pressure building behind my eyes that I refused to release. I was still sifting through the wreckage of my credit score and the shame of near homelessness when a county deputy knocked on my apartment door with news that Sarah had been in a single-car accident on a rain-slicked highway. She died at the scene. The deputy, a woman with tired eyes and a gentle voice, handed me a plastic bag containing Sarah's driver's license and a small silver locket I'd given her for her 16th birthday. I opened the locket and saw the tiny photo of Frank and me still inside, the hinge gritty from rain. The funeral was 2 days later. At the memorial service, held in a beige chapel with plastic flowers and a carpet that smelled like institutional disinfectant, Darren reappeared. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my old car, his hair cut in that precise way men get when they're trying to look respectable but end up looking like a product brochure. His hand rested on the lower back of a new woman, a platinum blonde real estate agent named Tanya, who kept dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Darren stepped up to the lectern and spoke eloquently about Sarah's tragic loss, how she'd been the light of his life, and how he'd never stop loving her. I sat in the back row, dressed in a black cardigan I'd bought at Goodwill that morning, and I noticed a row of glossy cars parked outside the chapel windows. One of them was a brand-new Porsche Taycan Turbo, gleaming like a black beetle under the mist. A valet ticket stub was peeking from Darren's suit pocket, the gold ink still crisp. After the service, Tanya cornered me near the condolence book. She held a clipboard and clicked a pen with an aggressive little snap. "Margaret, we're handling Sarah's estate just to make it easier on you," she said, her smile tight and professional. "If you could sign this quitclaim, it would release any claim you might have on her personal effects, the Honda, her small savings account. It'll expedite probate and take the burden right off your shoulders." I looked into her eyes and saw exactly nothing, a polished vacancy, the kind I used to see in the hardware chain's executives when they'd ask me to massage the depreciation schedule. I nodded, patted my cardigan pockets, and said, "Oh, I think I left my reading glasses in the car. Let me go fetch them." I slipped out a side door, my heart slamming against my ribs, and I didn't stop walking until I reached the bus stop 2 blocks away. I didn't have a car anymore, but I did have a bus pass. I took the number 9 crossdown to the apartment Sarah had been renting before the accident, a studio in a converted factory building with exposed brick and a freight elevator. The landlord, a tired woman with kind eyes, let me in when I told her who I was, and she saw the grief pressed into my face. The place smelled like Sarah, lavender and old paperback books, and I had to stand in the middle of the room for a full minute just to breathe her in. I started with the obvious spots under the mattress, inside the air vent behind the fridge, but Sarah had always been clever. In the back of her closet, taped flat against the wall behind her winter coat, I felt a rectangular bulge. I peeled away the tape carefully, and there it was, a fireproof lockbox the size of a shoebox with a combination dial. A sticky note on top read, "Mom, only you." The combination was Frank's birthday, the same numbers I'd used for the safe in our old house. My hands were shaking as I pried the lid open. Inside were her old journals, a stack of bank statements with highlighted line items, and a sealed yellow envelope. I opened the envelope first. It contained a single sheet of notebook paper, written in Sarah's curling cursive, the letters leaning slightly to the right like they were in a hurry. "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Darren forged your signature on the second loan note. He planned to default from the start. He bought the Porsche with money he skimmed from the shop's business line of credit, and he's been hiding cash in an offshore account. He laughs about it. He told me you'd never figure it out. Do not trust him. He'll try to make you the scapegoat. Save yourself. Please, I'm so sorry." I read that note 6 times. Then I folded it, slipped it into my bra against my skin, and walked out of that apartment a different woman. The grief was still there, heavy and sharp, but underneath it was a new thing, a coil of cold wire that tightened around my spine. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that karma sometimes needs a little human intervention. After the memorial, Darren and Tanya insisted I move in with them. "We can't let you live in that awful studio above a laundry," Darren said, his voice dripping with concern. He even showed up at my apartment with a coffee and a pastry, smiling that same easy smile. "We've got a guest suite. It's the least we can do after everything." I saw the trap for exactly what it was, because a woman who needs a caretaker is also a woman who can be controlled. I also saw an opportunity. I accepted, playing the part of a confused, grieving old woman whose mind was slipping. I shuffled when I walked. I called Tanya Tammy half the time and apologized profusely for the mistake. I'd misplace my purse on a kitchen chair, then later my keys in the laundry basket, then my shoes under the guest bed, and I'd ask the same questions about the weather twice in an hour. Darren's eyes lit up every time I nodded agreeably. It was like watching a raccoon spot an unlatched garbage can. Within a week, they presented me with a notarized power of attorney document at the kitchen table. Tanya had prepared it, she explained, just a formality to help manage things. She tapped the signature line with her pen. My old bookkeeper eyes scanned the fine print faster than they expected. The document would give Darren control over any residual financial matters related to Sarah's estate, and tucked into paragraph 8, in language that required a magnifying glass, was a clause where I would waive all future claims and causes of action against him regarding the foreclosure, the loan, and any related transactions, whether known or unknown, arising prior to or subsequent to the date of this instrument. Essentially, I'd be signing away my right to ever sue him or even testify against him. I recognized the phrasing from a legal continuing education course I'd taken 15 years ago on liability releases. It was the kind of blanket waiver that trial lawyers love because it strangles a case before it's even filed. I patted his hand and said, "Let me sleep on it, sweetheart. I'm just so tired." He didn't push too hard because he believed he had already won. They showed me to a guest room with a floral quilt and a latch on the outside of the door that I noticed immediately, but pretended not to see. I decided to let them keep that little illusion. Living in Darren's house was like being a fly on the wall of a crime scene. The place was a modern mini-mansion with vaulted ceilings, a 3-car garage, and a leased Mercedes in the driveway alongside that Porsche. But the financial cracks were spreading like ice fissures in a retaining wall. I'd hear Darren in his home office, a converted den off the kitchen, his voice rising, then dropping into a panicked hush. "What do you mean the lien is being perfected? I need 2 more weeks. Just stall the title company." Another time I heard him arguing about a balloon payment on the shop's equipment lease, a separate debt from the home equity loan, using language that suggested the finance company was about to repo the alignment machine and the hydraulic lifts. Tanya, meanwhile, spent hours on her laptop in the sunroom, furiously deleting negative reviews about a flip house she'd sold by claiming the buyer's inspection report had been forged. I heard her practicing her phone voice, bright and professional, telling a client that the foundation issues were fully disclosed in the addendum, a document I knew didn't exist. I started a mental log, the way I'd once tracked journal entries for the hardware chain. I memorized dates, names, dollar amounts, and account numbers that I overheard. Every frantic phone call, every dodged creditor, every new delivery of designer handbags that felt like a middle finger to common sense. One afternoon, I executed a small accident. I was in the kitchen, pretending to look for my reading glasses, and I clumsily knocked a full glass of water onto the granite counter, directly into the power strip that fed Tanya's laptop charger and a small printer. The strip crackled and died with a puff of acrid smoke. Tanya came running, saw the dead screen, and shrieked that she had a listing presentation in 90 minutes and every comp file was on that laptop. She was useless with anything that didn't involve a lip gloss applicator. Darren was out somewhere, probably at the storage facility where he was hiding assets. I looked at her calmly, pulled a multimeter from my oversized purse, and unscrewed the back of the power strip with a butter knife. The surge had blown the thermal fuse. I located a blown 12-amp fuse, bypassed it with a piece of stripped copper wire from a twist tie in the junk drawer, reassembled the strip, and got it humming again. Her laptop charger lit up. She stared at me. "Where did you learn that?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "My first husband could fix anything. I just paid attention." They never suspected that I understood more than a fuse, or that I'd deliberately placed the glass of water on a slight drip from a sponge I'd left there earlier. I needed them to see me as a harmless, occasionally useful old woman, and it worked. I began timing Darren's schedule with the precision of an auditor. Every Tuesday, he said he was going to business lunches, but I noticed the GPS on his car's infotainment screen showed a route to a luxury car storage facility 20 miles south, a place called Prestige Auto Vault. I looked it up on the library computer during one of my walks, and it charged $300 a month for a climate-controlled unit, the kind of place where collectors park Ferraris they don't drive. I found a crumpled receipt from a document shredding company in the kitchen trash, the kind that specializes in on-site destruction for legal firms. The receipt was for 8 bankers' boxes and included a note that said, "Additional charge for recycled material due to plastic file tabs." Another day, I heard him on the phone with a man he called Vinny, muttering about that accountant who's asking too many questions about the payroll taxes. Vinny told him to keep calm and find a fall guy. That was me, clearly. I needed physical proof. The home office, a room off the main hallway, had a heavy filing cabinet with a key lock. The key was on Darren's keychain, and I wasn't about to pick his pocket. So I waited until they both left for a weekend trip to a winery, a trip they did not invite me on because I'd pretended to be too weak to walk up the stairs. They locked the office door, but not the window, a double-hung sash that faced the side yard. I retrieved a putty knife from the garage and worked it between the sash and the frame, sliding the latch loose without leaving a mark. I slid the window open from the outside, hoisted myself onto a recycling bin, and levered myself inside like a 60-year-old cat burglar. The filing cabinet sat in the corner, a 4-drawer commercial-grade unit, steel and beige, with a 5-pin tumbler lock. I retrieved the leather case I'd kept in my purse for 30 years, Frank's 10-year anniversary gift, a set of tension wrenches, a half-diamond pick, a city rake, and a hook pick with a worn wooden handle. He taught me on a practice lock, sitting at the kitchen table while he explained the physics of shear lines. Feel for the binder, the one pin that resists. Light torque. Let the plug speak to you. I inserted the tension wrench into the keyway, applied gentle clockwise pressure with my forefinger, and slid the hook pick to the back of the lock. I counted the pins by feel. 5. Pin 1 lifted easily, no binding. Pin 2 was the binder, a tiny springy resistance that I lifted until I heard a faint click, the sound of the driver pin clearing the shear line. The plug rotated a fraction of a degree. Pin 3 bound next, then 4. 4 was stubborn, overset, so I released tension just enough to hear it drop back, then set it again with a lighter touch. Pin 5 gave way. The cylinder turned, and the top drawer slid open with a soft grind. Inside was a hanging folder labeled Margaret Liabilities. The folder contained a photocopy of my signature on a loan modification I had never seen, the balloon payment promissory note, and an amortization schedule that showed interest-only payments for 5 years with the entire principal due in a single lump sum. There was a legal opinion from a firm called Hartwell and Marsh, stamped privileged, that outlined a strategy to argue I had been a willing co-conspirator in the shop's financial mismanagement, that I'd participated in the embezzlement of payroll taxes, and that if the IRS or the credit union's fraud unit ever came calling, they could paint me as the mastermind and Darren as the overwhelmed son-in-law trying to help. Attached to the back was a purchase agreement for the Porsche. The down payment, $63,000, came from a withdrawal coded as shop equipment loan on an account labeled Mitchell Auto Care LLC. That account had been opened at a bank across state lines, a small institution in Delaware that specialized in private banking for shell companies, using my maiden name and a fake employer ID, but Darren's signature was all over the application documents. The signature cards showed his handwriting, the same forward slanting loops I'd seen on birthday cards. I was being framed in triplicate. I photographed every page with my phone, carefully replaced everything in its original order, and locked the cabinet. I wiped the windowsill and the putty knife with a microfiber cloth from my purse, though I'd worn thin cotton gloves the whole time. Then I sat in that dark office, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, and let the rage crystallize into something cold and precise, a diamond-hard resolve that would cut anything it touched. I needed an ally who could make this stick. I remembered the original foreclosure attorney telling me that a compliance officer at the credit union had flagged the second note as suspicious because the notary stamp looked irregular. The seal was slightly blurred, as if it had been photocopied or created with a cheap online template. Her name was Gloria Tran, and she headed the Financial Crimes Division of the Regional Federal Credit Union Administration Task Force. I called her from a prepaid burner phone I'd bought at a convenience store with cash, and we met at a diner off the interstate. the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that could strip paint. I slid Sarah's letter and my phone photos across the table. Gloria's expression didn't change, but her pen tapped a nervous rhythm on the formica. She had dark circles under her eyes and a stack of case files in her briefcase that told me she'd been chasing Darren for a while. "Mrs. Latham," she said quietly, "we've been investigating Darren Mitchell and a network of loan scams targeting seniors and family members for 8 months. Your testimony would close the loop on 3 open cases. If you're willing to gather one more piece of evidence, we can end him." She explained that the credit union had a dead man switch account, one my own husband Frank had set up years ago without my knowledge. Frank had opened a small trust worth $100,000 at the credit union, seeded from an inheritance his uncle left him. The trust had a unique clause he drafted with a lawyer who specialized in asset protection for vulnerable adults. If a beneficiary certificate was presented after his death, and if a triggering event occurred, specifically a default on the home equity loan coupled with a substantiated case of elder financial abuse, then the trust would automatically disburse funds to the credit union to satisfy the second note and clear my name. The release required my physical fingerprint verified at a specific notary stapler inside the credit union's headquarters, a device that digitally captured a thumbprint and encrypted it, and a verbal passcode that only I would know, the answer to a question Frank had filed with the trust administrator. What color did we paint the porch swing? The answer was, of course, sky blue. Darren had no idea the trust existed because Frank had structured it in a way that bypassed normal estate filings and showed up only on a private registry. He had watched his own father get scammed by a nephew out of a retirement account, and he had built this as my last line of defense. I nearly wept right there in that diner, but I swallowed it back because tears would have to wait. Gloria asked me to wear a small audio recorder during any future interaction where Darren tried to extract my signature. The device was the size of a matchbook, with a microphone sensitive enough to pick up whispers. The FBI's Elder Justice Task Force was ready to move, but they needed a recorded admission of the forgery or a direct attempt to coerce me into signing a release. I agreed. I also made a quiet decision that I would take everything from him, not just a legal victory. That night back at Darren's house, I staged a test to see how much humanity he had left. I knew he needed me to sign the final quitclaim and power of attorney because his Porsche was about to be repossessed. There was a title lien from the finance company that he couldn't clear unless he could prove he was the legal administrator of Sarah's estate and that all claims had been resolved. That document would also give him access to a small life insurance policy I'd later learn he had taken out on Sarah's life 2 months before the accident, a policy with an accidental death rider that doubled the payout. At dinner, I had Tanya print a fake document I told them I was ready to sign, a simple release of liability that Gloria had drafted as bait. I clutched my chest during the meal, gasped theatrically, and collapsed sideways off my chair onto the tile floor, careful to land on my hip and forearm to avoid real injury. I'd practiced the fall in my guest room the night before, using pillows. I lay there, moaning, "Darren, call 911. Please, my chest." He stood up slowly, looked down at me, his face utterly blank. Then he turned, walked to the island counter where I'd left the document, picked it up and inspected the signature line under the pendant lights. He didn't call for help. He didn't check my pulse. He didn't even look at me. He said to Tanya, who was still chewing a piece of sourdough with her mouth open, "Make sure she doesn't scratch the tile. I'll call an ambulance after I scan this to the title company." Then he stepped over my body, the tip of his loafer brushing my outstretched hand, and walked toward his office. I lay there on the cold tile, my heart hammering in my ears, but not from any cardiac event. That was the moment every last ember of mercy went cold and I became a machine. The next morning, Darren was jittery, his coffee cup trembling in his hand. He said we had to drive to the credit union's main branch to finalize some paperwork Sarah had started. He used that phrase, "Sarah had started," as if her ghost were standing there nodding along. I knew the documents in his leather portfolio were the ones that would erase me legally and financially. A full release of all claims, a notarized statement that I had willingly signed the second note and had been fully aware of its terms, and a quitclaim on Sarah's estate that would funnel everything to him. I put on my best confused old woman smile and said, "Of course, sweetheart. Do I need my ID?" We climbed into the Porsche, Tanya following in her Mercedes because she wanted to witness the moment when I finally did the right thing. I had the recorder taped to the inside of my bra, its tiny microphone aimed upward through the fabric of my blouse. I tested it that morning by whispering numbers while Gloria confirmed the signal on the other end. We pulled into the parking lot of the credit union, a glass and steel building with a fountain out front. I saw a white van parked near the far end, the kind with no rear windows and an antenna array on the roof. Gloria Tran waited inside with 2 FBI agents. Darren led me to a private meeting room on the second floor, a beige box with a mahogany table and a notary already seated, a man with an oily handshake and cufflinks shaped like tiny scales of justice. He was the same notary who had stamped the suspicious seal on the balloon note, and I recognized his face from a disciplinary notice Gloria had shown me. Darren spread the documents across the mahogany table, smoothing each page with reverence. "Just sign here, Mom," he said, his voice syrupy and low. "It's all standard. Once this is done, you can rest. I'll take over everything." He placed the pen in my hand, his fingers warm and insistent. I picked up the pen. I held it over the signature line, watching his pupils dilate with greed, a tiny black hole eating the light. Then I set it down with a soft click. "No," he blinked. "What?" "I'm not signing, Darren. I know about the forged signature on the balloon note. I have the original promissory note with a handwriting analysis that proves it wasn't mine. I know you skimmed $63,000 from the shop's line of credit to buy that Porsche, and I have the purchase agreement with the withdrawal code. I know about the offshore account in Delaware registered under my maiden name using a fake EIN, and I have the signature cards in your handwriting. I know you hired Hartwell and Marsh to build a legal strategy that would frame me for payroll tax fraud. I know about the dead man's switch my husband left for me, a trust that triggers only if I am the victim of elder financial abuse, and it already paid off the second note this morning just because I showed up today. And I know that the woman you married, my daughter, wrote a letter before she died to warn me about all of it." His face went ashen, then contorted into something ugly. "You're crazy," he hissed, leaning across the table. "You've lost your mind. Sign the papers or I'll make sure the IRS investigates you for embezzlement. It's already set up. You'll die in a federal prison." He grabbed my wrist, trying to force the pen back into my hand. That was exactly the threat Gloria needed. Just then the door opened. 2 FBI agents, a man and a woman in dark suits, stepped in with calm authority. The woman held up a small playback speaker. "Darren Mitchell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, and attempted elder financial exploitation. Everything you just said has been recorded. Please stand up and put your hands behind your back." The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a sink empty. He lunged for the documents, but the male agent pinned his arm behind him with a practiced efficiency. Tanya, who had been in the lobby scrolling Instagram, tried to walk out the front door, but a uniformed officer blocked her and asked her to have a seat. Her laptop was seized, and within hours, forensic accountants found the forged inspection reports, the phony addenda, and a communication trail with the same firm that had drafted the strategy against me. The Porsche was impounded right there in the parking lot, a flatbed truck arriving before Darren was even booked. The credit union instantly froze every account linked to his name, triggering the trust clause Frank had designed. By the end of the day, my credit report showed the second note satisfied and the foreclosure proceedings dismissed with prejudice. Darren's trial was swift. The evidence I had gathered, combined with Gloria's forensic accounting, Sarah's letter, and the recorded threat, convicted him on 7 felony counts. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Holloway with glasses on a chain and a reputation for creative sentencing, read the restitution report and then looked directly at me in the gallery. She said, "Mr. Mitchell, you exploited family trust with a cruelty that is breathtaking. Since you have no other marketable skills besides automotive work, and since the victim now owns an auto repair facility as a result of your abandonment and fraud, I am ordering a novel provision." She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, but suspended half of that in favor of strict supervised probation for 10 years. Restitution was set at $340,000, covering my lost equity, legal fees, and punitive damages. Because Darren had no liquid assets left after seizure, the court allowed me to claim the abandoned repair shop he'd leased under my name, and the equipment liens were voided due to fraud. Judge Holloway added, You will report to that shop 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, to perform all manual labor tasks the owner assigns. Your wages will be garnished at 100%. You will wear a uniform approved by the owner." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I sat there with my hands folded on the wooden railing, and I smiled the first real smile I'd felt in years. I reopened the shop within 3 months. I hauled out the grime, repainted the walls a crisp white, and hung a new sign out front that reads Leon of Lies Auto Care, the letters made of powder-coated steel. I hired 2 honest mechanics, men I'd vetted personally through the credit union's job training program for people recovering from setbacks. I built a social media presence off the sheer audacity of the story, posting videos of the shop's transformation with the hashtag #Dipstick of Deceit. The local news picked it up, and I've been on 3 segments now, showing off the custom thermal printer I programmed to generate oil change stickers. Every sticker prints with the shop name, the date and mileage, and the 10-digit docket number from Darren's civil judgment, along with a tiny QR code that links directly to the public court record of his conviction. Customers hold those stickers up like trophies. Our Yelp page is a gallery of smiling people standing next to a man in a gray jumpsuit, the words "Dipstick of Deceit" embroidered in bold red thread across his back. I had the uniform made by a local shop that also does bowling team shirts, and I paid extra for reinforced stitching because he's going to wear it for a decade. Darren arrived on his first day, escorted by his probation officer, a tall man with a clipboard and zero patience. He looked at the jumpsuit draped over a chair and his jaw tightened. "You can't make me wear that." I held up a laminated copy of the court order. "You can refuse," I said calmly, "and I'll call Judge Holloway this afternoon and recommend probation revocation. Then you can finish your sentence inside a federal penitentiary where the uniforms are orange, not gray. Your choice." He put it on. I assigned him to the oil change pit, the dirtiest, most repetitive job in the building. He drains oil, replaces filters, torques drain plugs, and scrubs bay floors with a stiff brush. Customers watch him through the window that separates the waiting area from the service bays. Sometimes they ask him to pose for photos, and he has to do it without speaking, because any verbal harassment of a customer violates the terms of his probation and sends him back to the judge. He doesn't speak to me at all, and that's fine. Every hour he works, the restitution balance ticks down on a digital display I mounted in the lobby, right next to a framed copy of Sarah's letter. The display updates in real time, connected to the payroll garnishment system. He sees it every morning when he walks in. I'll probably never see the full amount, but the shop turns a clean profit, and I donate 10% to an elder fraud prevention charity that trains bank tellers to spot the warning signs. I also started a free workshop once a month where I teach seniors how to read financial documents and recognize predatory schemes. We meet in the shop's break room, and I serve peach cobbler from a recipe my mother left in that cedar chest I never got back. I no longer live above a laundromat. I rent a small cottage on the east side of town, a place with a peach tree out back, and a porch I painted sky blue. I drive a reliable used Camry, and I keep Frank's lock-picking set in the glove box, not because I think I'll need it, but because it reminds me that every problem has a sheer line if you know where to apply torque. Frank's trust, once triggered, released enough seed capital to pay off my old debts and give me a cushion. I didn't get my original ranch back, but I got something better. My agency, my dignity, and the knowledge that my daughter's warning finally landed exactly where it belonged, right in the middle of her husband's carefully constructed life of lies. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If you believe that poetic justice sometimes needs a good mechanic and a custom jumper, hit like and subscribe. Karma runs on regular oil changes around here. I'll see you next time.